The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts Alison Furno and Debi Vandenboom.
Today's topic, high-risk pregnancy, abortion, and Prop 139. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a retired OBGYN professor at a medical school in New Mexico. Say hello to Dr. Levatino. Tino, dang it. I tried so hard. I was like, Tina.
I figured I would correct you so he didn't have to.
I know, dang it. Okay, at least I got the Leva part right, the first part. Well, thank you for being on the show today. I want to jump right into this because you have a really interesting background, and I think people are going to learn a lot from your expertise and your experience, what you've been through. So let's start by talking a little bit about your medical background and some things that you've learned over the years.
That's a big topic. Where do you want to start?
Yeah. So where did you go to school?
I went to, after college, I went to Albany Medical College in Albany, New York, and I received my medical degree in 1976. Wow. I had a one-year internship, and then I started my obstetrics and obstetrics and gynecology residency after that, and graduated in 1980, and then went into private practice.
Wow. Okay. So you went into private practice. What was that like your first couple of years?
Good. I mean, a little bit turmoiled. We moved from upstate New York to the west coast of Florida. Mm-hmm. Found out pretty quickly that a young couple with young kids didn't really belong in a retirement community. So after a year, we moved back to Albany, New York, and I set up practice with a physician that I had trained with. He was a general OBGYN working in Troy, New York, which is right next to Albany, New York.
Okay.
And at the time, you were both delivering babies and performing abortions,
yes.
Correct? And you performed abortions up to what, how far along?
Well, that part of the practice, I always make people understand we weren't running an abortion clinic. There's a regular OBGYN office like almost every woman has been to. We did everything. We did deliveries, we did hysterectomies, and yes, we did abortions too. At the time, in 1981, when I went back to New York, those of us in the abortion industry were looking for a better method of second-trimester abortion. Up until that time, and I had been trained as a resident to do saline abortions. These aren't done anymore, but suffice it to say these women had to go through labor, and it would take anywhere from 8 to 36 hours for them to deliver their usually dead children. We wanted a better method of later-term abortion, and this is when a procedure called suction D&E was being developed. We wanted a method of abortion that was like suction D&C. The patient would go to sleep, and when she woke up, it would all be over. Understand that back then, they were all surgical abortions. There was no medical abortion at the time, so you had to have the skill and knowledge to be able to do a surgical abortion. There was suction D&C abortions in the first trimester up to about 13 weeks from her last period. And then we were doing, to answer your question, suction D&E abortions up to 24 weeks from her last menstrual period.
Okay. And just to clarify, because I think a lot of people don't know, when he's talking about medication abortion, that means abortion pills.
Abortion pills.
Abortion pills, and then any of the other procedures after that are surgical abortions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And until just 2 or 3 years ago, the majority of abortions were still surgical abortions. Now those numbers have flipped, and they'll never go back. The vast majority of abortions now are pill abortions or medical abortions or chemical abortions, pick your term.
Right.
So was the demand at that time going up? Was that why you guys were looking for new ways to solve the problem, so to speak?
Not particularly. As I said, the saline abortions were difficult, expensive, prolonged hospital stays, really difficult on patients, really difficult on staff. It was just a horror show in a lot of ways.
Right.
Suction D&E was seen as a cleaner, easier method of doing these second trimester abortions. You could do them as an outpatient, and there was no prolonged hospital stay. The trick was, in Albany, New York, where I worked in that area, there were at least 50 obstetrician gynecologists who did abortions. I mean, it was the vast majority of OBs in Albany at the time did abortions. But nobody wanted to touch the D&E procedure. It's tricky. These kids are much, much bigger, and it takes a higher degree of skill to do it. And my partner and I saw an opportunity. Because so few doctors, really, we were the only ones for a while in the area that would do a D&E abortion. Another physician in Albany did start doing D&E abortions shortly afterwards, but there were just the three of us in an area where the total population was approaching almost 1 million people.
Interesting. So do we want to, I want to know what this, I hate to ask, but I know we're going to talk about it anyway. I'm like, what the process is like. But you're talking about, so you guys are doing later term abortions, right? So the kids are bigger, more developed. Did you, starting to do this, did you think any differently about it as the kids were bigger?
When you're in your training, and when I graduated from medical school in 1976, if you asked me how I felt about the abortion issue, I would have not hesitated for even a second to tell you I was pro-choice. This was a decision between a woman, her doctor, and no one, including the baby's father, had anything to say about it. A lot of people identify themselves as pro-life or pro-choice, but for a lot of people it doesn't really directly affect their lives. It doesn't even affect how they vote. But when you're an obstetrician gynecologist and you say you're pro-choice, this isn't some vague political position. You have to decide whether you're going to actually do those procedures. So in my training, I learned to do both first and second trimester surgical abortions.
Okay.
And, that's really close to where, probably in those days it was not as high, but today you have 24-week babies that survive
exactly.
delivery. And so really you're delivering babies and you're also ending the lives of babies at the same place, right? So what is that like? Is that, are you just compartmentalizing? I'm just trying to understand how the mindset, you know what I mean? Because it seems like that would be difficult to do where that that's a life you're delivering and in some cases you're trying to preserve that baby and save the pregnancy so that the mother can continue that pregnancy. And in other cases, you're ending it.
Yeah, and you're asking a question that a lot of people ask and a lot of people don't understand. First, you're in your training. You learn to do a suction D&C abortion. We can describe it if you want. There's a machine, a suction machine, where all these pieces go in, and part of the procedure is opening the machine at the end and making sure that you got all the pieces. The same thing is true with the later term abortions that we can get into if you wish. The first time you do an abortion like that and you're picking through little arms and legs, you notice it. But if you're really truly dedicated, you don't look all that hard. And I tell people, believe me, please believe me from personal experience, you can get used to anything if you do it often enough.
Right.
Same thing later. With the later term abortions, now we're talking about much bigger pieces. And that kind of was a little bit of a first time I saw one. But again, you can get used to just about anything. A lot of pro-life people, it's funny, I had this discussion just a few days ago with someone. I just don't understand. I just do not understand. Don't doctors take embryology? Don't you know that the heart beating at 28 days? And don't you know that they have fingerprints? And don't you know I have 2 arms and 2 legs? Better than you do.
Right.
But you know what? And it's honestly, and I will speak only from my own personal experience. I won't profess to know what anybody else thinks, but I'm telling you what you're thinking. I don't care.
It's a job, right?
I am dedicated to doing this. I'm helping my patients.
Right.
This is the right thing to do. So in the end, I know all of those facts, but I don't care.
Yeah. Well, and you see it, I think, I've watched a lot of videos of Planned Parenthood employees talking, and you can tell it's just like, they're separated from the emotion of it, right? So it's just a cold, hard fact. This is what we're doing, and this is, you can kind of see it when you hear people talking about it.
It's true of all medical care to a degree.
I think
it's
so, yeah.
farther in this case. You start learning that the first day in medical school. My first day in medical school, I find myself in an anatomy lab, and there's a corpse laying on a table.
Right.
Happened to be a woman. And the first 4-hour lab, we had to skin this corpse from neck to pubic bone. And we've never had medical instruments in our hands, and we're picking away. And I won't get into a graphic description, but you learn to separate yourself. Yeah. Yes, I know that this was a woman who had people that loved her. She may have had children, or a patient comes in my office and is looking for care of some sort, or she's on an operating room table. Yes, I know that this person has a life and has people that care about her and that she cares for. But for that hour or two, I separate myself from that. It's part of the job.
Yeah.
She's a collection of bones, nerves, muscles, and blood vessels, and I'm there to do a job. It's the same separation, but taken to the ultimate degree.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about you were talking about a certain type of abortion, D&E, is that what you're saying? Explain that, and what is that like?
Imagine that you were an obstetrician gynecologist like me. Imagine that you're a pro-choice obstetrician gynecologist like I used to be. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 20 weeks pregnant. Her uterus is all the way up to her umbilicus. If you could see her baby on an ultrasound, and that's easy, her baby would be look at your hand. From the tip of your middle finger to your wrist, that's head to rump, a 20-week baby, not counting the legs. She's been feeling her baby kick for the last week or so, but now she's asleep on an operating room table, and you're there to help her with her problem. You walk into the operating room scrubbed and gowned, and to the right there's a set of instruments. The first thing you reach for is a suction catheter. A suction catheter is a clear plastic tube. This one's about 11 inches long. And picture yourself with a hole through the center. And picture yourself putting this up in through the cervix into the uterus, and instruct your circulating nurse to turn on the suction machine. And what you'll see is pale yellow fluid running through the tubing into the machine. That was the amniotic fluid that was there to protect the baby. Now, the only difference between a D&E and a D&C is the size.
Right.
If she were only 12 outside 13 weeks from her last menstrual period or less, now look at your hand again. The width of your hand from head to rump is a 12-week baby. You could pretty much do the entire abortion with that one suction catheter. Babies as big as your hand don't fit through catheters this size. So you need something more, and you get something called a Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's stainless steel. The business end is about 2.5 inches long and a 1/2 inch wide with rows of sharp teeth. Hand me a finger. I won't hurt you. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go.
I can feel that.
Picture yourself putting this in through the cervix, and just, you can use an ultrasound. Frankly, it doesn't help. It just slows things down. I used to do them as a blind procedure. Do it by feel. Blindly grab anything you can and pull, and feel yourself pulling, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about 4 inches long, which you put down on the table next to you. And reach in again, and grasp and pull hard. Out comes an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you. And reach in with the same instrument again and again, and tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart, and lungs. Head on the baby that size is about the size of a plum. They can't see it, but you're pretty sure you've got it. If you've got a hold of something with your clamp and your fingers are spread as far as they will go, you know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Now you can pull out skull pieces. Sometimes the little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations. You just successfully performed a second-trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose. You just made, and this is what I made in 1984, $800 cash in 15 minutes. That's what I used to make in 1984 doing one of these. Today, that $800 in 1984 is worth $2,300 today.
Wow. That's what they're charging for that.
No, they're different amounts. Their average prices are still around $800 or $900. They haven't kept up with inflation.
But that would be worth $2,300 today.
That would, they would have been today. But on the other hand, there are places that charge you more. You're free to charge whatever you want.
Right. And just to clarify, I mean, I know this is graphic, but up until that point where you're grabbing pieces, that baby is alive and moving around.
Absolutely. And this is a point I want to make, and I want to jump ahead a little bit. The abortion I just described, again, look at your hand on a baby that big. Would that abortion be legal in Arizona today? No. If Proposition 139 passes, that abortion will be legal in Arizona.
And that is a pre-viable baby.
Correct.
What does that mean?
You were right about, well, you had said earlier about when babies can live outside the womb. We're talking 40 plus years ago. Viability at that point was around 27, 28 weeks from last menstrual period. But medicine didn't stand still for the last 50 years. We got better and better and better. And now viable children with proper care can live all the way down to about 22 weeks of pregnancy. World Health Organization recognizes 22 weeks from last menstrual period as the time of fetal viability. With current care in a proper medical center, 67%-ish of patients, preborn babies like this, or preterm babies, I should be saying, at 22 weeks or later will survive.
Yeah.
Wow. I have one more question on this with your tools. Can you injure the person, like the mom, and can you grab anything else? Is there anything else, or is that air, you know what I mean? Like when you're feeling for that? Because I thought that was so, I mean, that's crazy that you're...
How much anatomy and physiology did you take in school?
Not that much.
Okay. Well, we got the uterus, all right? That's where the baby is.
Right.
What's right next to the uterus? Bladder. What's right behind the uterus? The colon and the rectum. Colon.
Okay.
Yes, the uterine walls, there are numerous complications that can occur with any abortion. With a surgical abortion, there's a risk of infection.
Right.
There is a risk of bleeding. There is a risk of perforating uterus or going through the wall of the uterus with one of the instruments. If it does that, then you could potentially damage bladder, bowel, or anything else that's there. Real story. Again, it gets into who should be doing abortions, and we need to talk about that, and where they should be done and under what circumstances. We were dedicated abortionists. We are for a woman's right to choose, and I'm going to help her terminate that pregnancy, no question. But I don't want to injure my patient. I want her in the safest environment possible. Now, things have changed over the last few years. Yes, I understand, but we would never do an abortion that late outside of a hospital environment. My patient is asleep on an operating room table with an anesthesiologist in the room. And I had a case, she was about 18, almost 19 weeks pregnant. I'm doing my Suffer clamp and I'm pulling pieces out. And I reach in and I pull, and out, instead of a baby part, I've got the lady's intestines in my clamp. Because we have gone through the wall, grabbed her intestines, pulled them out through the uterus and through the vagina to now the point that her intestines are now outside of her vagina. Now, this is what I mean about the abortionists and, on the radio. I doubt they listen to too many of these programs. Sit there and go, well, we don't have to go to hospitals. We can just do them in the clinic. Yeah. And what are you going to do when you perforate the uterus and you've got her intestines outside the vagina in a clinic and you are not in a hospital environment? This is an emergency, except I'm in a sterile environment. I'm in an operating room. I have an anesthesiologist. I call the front desk and say, get Dr. So-and-so, which of the available surgeons is free right now? Get him in here. We've got a problem. And we fixed things, and we completed the abortion, and she did fine. What exactly are you going to do in a clinic outside the hospital in a situation like that?
Right.
There were other rules we had that weren't required. One of the interesting things about Arizona law right now as it stands, which will go away if Prop 139 passes, is an ultrasound is required before an abortion is performed, and an abortion must be performed by a doctor. This may sound strange to people, but when you're in a voting booth and you're looking at Proposition 139, read it carefully, and you will notice, please notice, the word doctor never appears in the proposition.
Right.
A licensed healthcare practitioner. That's a very broad category. It never says doctor. But in this case, you don't even have a doctor. You may potentially not even have a doctor doing that abortion. So and Arizona law does require an ultrasound currently before all abortions. Now, do I think as an obstetrician that every abortion requires an ultrasound? Not necessarily. But what did I do when I was doing abortions? We did an ultrasound on every single patient. It was not required, but we did it, and we did it at no charge for our patients. We're charging for the abortion, that's enough. But we did an ultrasound on every single patient because of two things. One, I want to make sure I know how far along that pregnancy is. If I'm doing a procedure and I think she's 9 or 10 weeks pregnant and she's really 14 or 15 or maybe bigger, that could be a problem. And with chemical abortion, medical abortion, those pills are only approved up to 10 weeks from last menstrual period.
Right.
We can talk more about that because there's a lot going on with telemedicine abortions. And you don't even have to see anybody,
Right.
much less a doctor, but we can get there. The other thing that's important in terms of having an ultrasound, and the other reason we did them on every single patient, was we want to make sure this patient does not have a tubal or an ectopic pregnancy, because that requires a totally different kind of care. So we had our own rules, even though we worked in New York. I was in New York State. It's wide open in New York. You can do an abortion anytime you want for any reason.
Right.
Been that way for decades, and it
that's
still
what it'll
is.
be here if Prop 139 passes.
Absolutely, and then another thing that Prop 139 will kill. That again, it was not a rule in New York, but we as physicians, we'll do an abortion, no problem. Wouldn't even think twice about it, like I told you. But we never, ever, ever, even though we were allowed by law, never touch a minor patient without parental knowledge and consent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that would go away if Prop 139 passes as well.
Yeah.
Who needs doctors? Who needs parents?
Right.
Right. And I definitely want to get a little bit more into what 139 means. But before we do that, I want to ask the question, because we're really, this is pretty intense stuff. But as you're saying, how to separate it, right? So you've been able to do this for so long. You're probably making really good money at it. Like you said, you're one of the first, you and your other doctors are in that area. So you have good business reason to be there. Why did you stop?
I met my wife to be when I was an intern at the Albany Medical Center right after I graduated from medical college. And after about a year of dating, we got married, and like many other young couples, we wanted to have children of our own, and found out pretty quickly we had an infertility problem. She was just not getting pregnant. Mm-hmm. I sent her to the best infertility specialist in town. Any woman who's been through an infertility workup knows that it is difficult, painful, embarrassing. And she would come home from those visits and she would lock herself in the bathroom and she would cry. Because two ironies were not lost on her. One, here she is married to an OBGYN and she can't get pregnant. Two, here she is trying to get pregnant and her husband's killing babies in abortions. Now, see, we made a really, here's the real kicker. We started dating, and of course you start to get to know each other, and I was obviously pro-choice. Well, she was pro-life. Not strident or out there picketing or anything, but she didn't think this was a good thing. And instead of hashing it out as a couple, we just ignored it. And that's a major mistake in any relationship. So she went through a lot. She ended up going through an operative procedure. Finally, her doctor came to us and said, there's one more procedure I can try. It will take about an hour and a half. He walked out of the operating room 4.5 hours later. I mean, this was decades ago, but I can remember the room. I can remember what I was wearing. I remember this experience. And he walked up to me and said, after 4.5 hours in the operating room, said, look, I never tell anyone that they won't be able to have a child, but don't count on it. We came from big families and we really wanted children. After we got over the shock of that, we decided, well, all right, these are the cards we've been dealt. We'll adopt a child. We'd be perfectly happy to adopt a child and welcome that child into our home and raise them as our own. Anyone who's tried to adopt a baby knows how difficult that is. We went to religious agencies. We went to state agencies. We went to county agencies. We went anywhere we could. And the best we could do after months of effort was get on a 5-year waiting list to get on the waiting list.
Wow.
After several months of that frustration, I came up with what my wife's, we've been married 47 some odd years now, but I came up with, my wife still credits as the best idea I ever came up with in our whole marriage, beside my asking her to marry me. And that was This is ridiculous. We are getting nowhere with the normal channels. I know 50 obstetricians on a first-name basis. Let's advertise. Maybe we'll get lucky and get a private adoption. Maybe some kid will fall through the cracks and we'll be able to find a baby to adopt. And that's exactly what we did. In August of 1978, I was working in the operating room with another physician, and it's like you see in the movies. You can't, when you're in an operating room, you're, quote, sterile. You can't touch anything but the instruments and the patient. But the circulating nurse tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and when I did so, she was holding up a piece of paper that said, "Call Marcia as soon as you're done." Now, Marcia was the head of social services at the hospital where we were working. And that's all it said, but I knew what it meant, because she's one of the people we talked to. And when I called her afterwards, she informed me there was a 15-year-old girl in labor in the delivery room, in labor right now. She'd had no prenatal care. The first time she saw a doctor was the day before. But now she's in labor. The baby looks healthy. She wants to give her baby up for adoption. Are you interested? Of course I was interested. I mean, I remember staring at the face of the telephone to call my wife with this news and know that I was just 7 digits away from becoming a father. And literally, by the grace of God, we were able to adopt a little girl that we named Heather in August of 1978. Fantastic. We finally have a baby. And after all the years and after all the tears and after all the doubts, we got a baby of our own. And my wife got pregnant the very next month. And our son Sean was born in July of 1979. Heather and Sean were figuratively and literally close. They were only 10 months apart. But hey, I've got to, and it was during that whole time when all this was going on, we're trying to adopt a baby. We don't know what's going to happen. We're going through the infertility thing, and I'm still doing the abortions. I'm not an idiot. I know why there are so few babies to adopt. And I did my job, but I really struggled with it during that time because, during the day I'm doing abortions, and at night it's part of what I do. And at night we're looking for one more phone number to call. And I remember a particular abortion, going through the pieces and thinking, gosh, here I am. I'm just throwing kids in the garbage. Wouldn't at least one of these women allow us to take her baby home and care for her as our own? But of course it doesn't work that way. Now, fast forward, I've got a son and a daughter. I've got the proverbial millionaire's family. And any doubts I had about abortion, which were strictly selfish, evaporated, and I went back to business as usual. I graduated from my residency in 1980. We moved to the west coast of Florida. As I said, after a year, we decided, we didn't belong there and moved back to upstate New York and set up shop with another physician. And we were running an OB/GYN office. See, it's a little different from an abortion clinic. If somebody comes in an abortion clinic and that's all I do, and she changes her mind, I don't make any money. In my practice, we didn't care. You want to have an abortion? No problem. You want to have your baby? No problem. We can take care of all of it. So we weren't pressured like that. But over the next 4 years, I did 1,200 abortions, including 120 of the late-term abortions that I described. Hey, but life's good. The kids are growing, and we can finally afford a house and all the things you do, in your marriage and with your kids. And everything was wonderful until June 23rd, 1984. June 23rd was a Saturday. It was a beautiful day in Albany. I was on call, but it wasn't very busy. I'd made rounds and got to spend the rest of the day with my family. We took the kids to an amusement park that day. We had dinner together. And that evening we had friends come over for cake and coffee. Kids were playing in the backyard. And while we were talking with our friends at 7:25 that night, we heard the screech of brakes out in front of the house. The kids had gone on the road and Heather had been hit by a car. We ran out and did everything we could, but it made absolutely no difference. And she essentially died in our arms in the back of an ambulance that night. Now, if anybody listening has kids, they may think they have some idea of what that might be like. If you haven't been through this yourself, you have no idea. I hope you never find out. But what do you do after a disaster? You bury your child, you take some time off, and then you try to get back into your life. And I don't know exactly how long it was after Heather's death, but I showed up at OR number 9 at Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, for a second trimester D&E abortion. And I wasn't thinking of it as anything special. It was routine. obviously I had other things on my mind. And I started that abortion, and I picked up that sulfur clamp, and I ripped out an arm or a leg, and I just stared at it in the clamp, and I got sick. But you know something? When you start an abortion, you can't stop. Earlier, we talked about stacking up body parts on the side of the table. That's not to gross out the folks that are listening to the program. When you do an abortion, you have to keep inventory. You have to make sure that you get 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces. Because if you don't, your patient will come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I finished that abortion, and I know that it sounds strange, but I promise everyone who's listening that everything I'm saying is firsthand and true. For the first time in my career, after all those years and all those abortions, I really looked at that pile of body parts on the side of the table. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see what a great doctor I was helping her with her problem, and I didn't even see the $800 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And it occurred to me in that moment that this patient had come to me, figuratively, never literally. But this patient came to me and said, here's $800, kill my son or daughter.
Wow.
And I was the kind of person that would look at her with no compunction at all and say, sure, I'll do that.
Wow. It's a big difference from, you know what I mean, like when you first started. And what did you do after that? So you walked out of...
I finished that abortion. I went to my partners, and I told them I would no longer do any second trimester D&E abortions. It was just too difficult with those big babies. I was hard-headed. I told you I was dedicated. I knew why I felt bad. I'll get over this. So I told them I'll just do the little ones, the suction DNCs we were doing in the office. And for several months, I soldiered on doing those. But a change had occurred that I can't take back. You know, people think doctors are so smart. We're no different than anybody else. When you finally realize in your heart, not just your head, that killing a baby as big as your hand for money is wrong, it doesn't take you too long to figure out that it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or maybe even just an inch tall. It's all the same. And in February of 1985, I'm ashamed to say it was that long, I went back to my partners a second time and told them I would no longer do any more abortions, and I never did another one after that.
Wow.
Wow. So with that, let's go to Prop 139. I want to know about this Arizona ballot initiative, and what is your opinion as a doctor from this perspective?
Proposition 139 is, you see, once the Dobbs decision came down a couple of years ago, I know that many pro-life people, of course, have been working for decades and decades and decades for that to happen. And without bringing down Roe v. Wade, there was nothing we could do about it. The whole thing was frozen. Everybody had this right to an abortion. Once Dobbs went down, then it went back to the states, and then every state became a battleground. Now, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, California, Oregon, many other places have very, very liberal governments, state legislators and governors, and many of them very rapidly passed laws that basically read like Prop 139. They all use pretty much the same language. This is tried and true language. And you've got to understand what that language means. It's really critical. It's going to get a little lengthy here, but it's important. Prop 139 says, now other states pass laws prohibiting abortion or restricting it to the first 6 weeks of pregnancy, so-called heartbeat bills. And I know everybody screams, not everybody, but many, many people, oh my God, they took away our right to an abortion with these heartbeat bills. 45% of all abortions, almost 1 million a year, or probably more in reality, because we don't track those numbers accurately. 45% of all abortions are done at 6 weeks or less in pregnancy. This has been demonstrated in the research. So almost half of all abortions are still being done at 6 weeks or less, even with heartbeat bills. But there are states where it's outright prohibited, like Texas, as one example. So the strategy on the other side has been, okay, then we'll take it to the voters. And in states where they have these kind of public initiatives, like Arizona, we'll introduce these voting measures to amend the Constitution. You want it in the Constitution now, because then it becomes a fundamental right. And that's how Prop 139 reads, just like all the rest of them. An abortion can be done by a licensed healthcare provider, not doctor. That includes a lot of ground. Nurses, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, nurse midwives. There are numerous other professionals that fit in the category of healthcare professional under Arizona law. Current law says a doctor must do it. This Prop 139 takes that away, and takes away the most important safety valve that we have in terms of preventing abortion complications. Because having a doctor, we teach our medical students at the medical college where I teach from day one. A patient comes in, you do a history. You sit down and talk to that patient, and you do a medical history. Then you do a physical exam on the patient. And in pregnancy, the most important things you're doing is making sure that the pregnancy is as far as you think it is by physical exam. And many times they are not.
Right.
And if necessary, you do an ultrasound to establish the length of gestational age and rule out an ectopic pregnancy. These are important safety measures that every single patient having an abortion should be seen by a doctor, interviewed, examined before they are treated, to make sure that we know the length of gestation and we know that they don't have an ectopic pregnancy. Prop 139 would take that away. The language in Prop 139 basically says a healthcare practitioner can do an abortion for any reason or no reason at all, up to 24 weeks. This is beyond fetal viability, as we've already discussed. Or they say fetal viability. So we can argue. I'm going to take that back. They say up to viability. You'll hear some doctors say 22, 23, 24, typically falls in that range. So we won't quibble about it on the radio program. But up to viability for any reason or no reason at all. And then beyond, even if the child is viable, the abortion can still be performed as long as the healthcare practitioner, in good faith, decides that the abortion is necessary to promote her physical or mental health. I'm an attorney as well as being a physician, and law is different. You have to understand every single word. Every word means something. Right. So the question becomes, well, and this goes all the way back to Roe versus Wade. You ask 99% of people on the street to name a Supreme Court decision, they'll say Roe v. Wade's probably the only one they know. How many people have heard of Doe versus Bolton?
Me.
Yeah, you have.
You're like, but
not many.
Not many have.
Right.
And Doe versus Bolton was the same way as Roe, and was very important because it defined the term health. And it's in Prop 139, just as like it's in all of these rules, all of these laws. Well, it includes her physical health, as Prop 139 does. Well, that's great, but how bad does her physical health have to be to justify a post-viability abortion? It doesn't say.
Right.
You can do a post-viability abortion to promote and help her mental health. How bad does her mental health have to be to justify a post-viability abortion? It doesn't say. I mean, what if she's going to have a psychotic break? What if she's suicidal?
Right.
What if she's depressed? What if she's anxious about her education or her economic future or any number of other things? You see, the point of it was deliberately worded so vaguely so that when you say when you talk about physical and mental health, all I have to do is certify as the abortion. I don't even have to write it down. I'm just in my judgment, this abortion is necessary to help her physical or mental health. That means any abortion, anytime, for any reason. And there's no oversight of any kind by the state or by the medical profession allowed with Prop 139.
And this is the
Right.
person taking money for performing that abortion that's saying,
Who makes no money if they don't do the abortion. And
Right.
and I get this all the time. I know people, some people listen, oh, he's making this stuff up. No. I told you, everything I'm telling you is firsthand and true. When I was doing abortions, we did some of our later abortions in hospitals. And we were working at a hospital in Troy, New York, and several members of the governing board of that hospital did not like the idea of having abortions in their hospital, even if they were legal in New York. So the board tried to stop us from doing abortions in the hospital. So we made a deal with them. We promised them that we would only do abortions that were necessary abortions, that were necessary for her physical or mental health. And the idiots agreed. So from that day on, every single abortion we did in that hospital, and I can tell you they were for any reason whatsoever, I would write in the chart, I certified that this abortion is medically necessary and sign my name to it.
Right.
This is no different.
So
And just really quick with that, because I want to make sure we're kind of we've been talking for a while, which is fantastic. It's been so good, but we are going to probably need to wrap it up soon. But I want to make sure that, you're talking about being medically necessary. And so is it at that point, at 20 weeks, 24 weeks, is it safer for that woman to have an abortion if there's a medical emergency than it is to do something else?
Medical
Generally.
emergencies do occur. I can think of situations where an abortion would be the best care. I can go, very quickly. A patient comes in at less than 20 weeks pregnant. Her membranes are ruptured and she's infected. You have to end that pregnancy. Now, everyone knows that you don't have to be an obstetrician to know that pregnancy can be dangerous. There are life-threatening conditions in pregnancy. For almost 10 years, as a pro-life physician, I worked again at the Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, where I trained. Now I'm an attending physician and a member of the faculty taking care of people in these same high-risk situations. Decompensating heart function, cancers, severe toxemia or preeclampsia. These people were in serious trouble, and we took care of them routinely because these patients were referred to our hospital because we had the facility to take care of them. I took care of these patients for almost 10 years. In 10 years, I terminated, they've stolen the term, I mean that, but what I mean by that is I ended hundreds of pregnancies to save women's lives. Now, how many babies did I have to deliberately kill in the process in almost 10 years? You want to guess? None. Not even one. Now, there were some cases that came in that would be better off terminated by abortion, but I'm telling you, they are very rare. Now, what's going to be sold is, we need this to save women's lives. Case in point, patient came in 27 weeks pregnant. Her blood pressure is 220 over 160.
Insane.
She has severe preeclampsia. She has a severe headache. She could seize any minute. She is in serious trouble. How did we take care of her? Well, the cure for preeclampsia is to get that baby out of there. And we delivered her. We stabilized her. In this case, we did a cesarean section. Within an hour, the baby's out, 13 weeks premature, but being cared for by the perinatologist and the neonatologist. And she and the baby did fine. Now, that child happens to be 28 years old now, and I talked to her last week. She still keeps in touch with me. But let's say for a minute that we would want to use let's say she'd have every right, say Prop 139 passes and she was in Arizona, she'd have every right to say, you know what, I don't want to have that delivery, I want an abortion instead. Could we use abortion to save her life? And the answer is no. Because a late-term abortion, when you've got real obstetric emergencies, most severe obstetric emergencies happen after viability, the vast, vast majority. Not all, but the majority. And it takes anywhere from 3 to 7 days to prep the patient and accomplish a later abortion, second trimester D&E or induction abortion, which we haven't even talked about. Okay, it takes days. When your patient comes in with a real obstetrical emergency, you don't have days to resolve the problem. Yeah. You do a delivery. Mm-hmm. So this business about how we have to have abortion to save women's lives in the vast majority of cases is total fiction.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's go to, I mean, that's a great description of 139 and what it can do if it is passed. So I'll finish with you, Debbie. What can people do right now that are listening that are like, I want to get involved, I want to help make sure this doesn't pass in Arizona?
Yeah, so be talking to people. I mean, we need to be spreading this word and sharing no on 139. Share this episode. Arizona Right to Life has information. The No on 139 campaign, which is itgoes-too-far.com, has information. There are lots of organizations that have information out there that are explaining and showing the wording, like what you were talking about, Dr. Levatino was saying, read it. I know that on the itgoes-too-far.com, that website, it has where it goes through and explains and shows you the language of what's in the ballot initiative so that you can read it. It's designed to share with people that maybe don't understand that information. So there is a lot of information out there, but we need to be really vocal and explaining this is a terrible idea for Arizona, and we need to vote no on 139.
Arizona law already protects women in serious trouble.
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
absolutely.
And
Well,
that
thank
is
you.
coming from an OBGYN, so that, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for all of your information, all of your expertise. That was insane and really good conversation at the same time. So thank you for coming on the show, Doctor.
I do want to say one final thing. This was a really tough conversation. So if women are listening, or if you are listening that you've had an abortion, please contact the church, find help. There are Bible studies all over the place at pregnancy centers. You are not alone, and there is hope, there is healing. It is not an unredeemable sin, as we're sitting here with Dr. Levatino, who's left that lifestyle behind as well. That if you've had an abortion, you can be forgiven and set free from that. God loves you, and he wants you to be whole and healed. So please find help. You can contact us to get that if you need somewhere to go.
Yes. So thank you so much, Debbie, for that. That's always a great reminder when we have these conversations, because they're not easy conversations. And like you said, there's a lot of people that are impacted by this one way or another. So thank you so much, Doctor, for coming on the show today. And thanks for listening to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify and follow us on social media. Find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.